Hey, Amy.
Hello.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. How's everything going so far?
It's good. Yeah, the first sessions were really dynamic. I'm excited about the day.
Nice.
Stage, yeah. What's your day looking like besides this?
It's good. I have a bunch of presentations. I have like my little cheat sheet of the ones that I'm interested in attending, all laid out in front of me.
Yeah, everybody has their own way of conferencing.
Right.
It can be weird to do in-person conferences again.
Exactly.
What I mainly think of with in-person conferences is that the coffee at the conference center is always like $5 more than it would be if you just went to Starbucks across the street.
Sure. It looks like Olivia is asking a question.
Olivia is
in the chat.
Let's see. Yeah. So Olivia, I guess you could probably hear us. Can you request to share your audio and video? That should let you jump in.
I did actually watch your video tutorial. I just didn't see the giant blue button like right in front of my face.
Yep.
Hi, everyone.
Hey, Chris. What's up, guys?
Hey, good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Chris, is your high school off today?
I took a day off because I've got an appointment this afternoon as well, so this actually worked out pretty well.
Nice.
And surprisingly, I was actually able to pre-arrange a substitute. I know that's been an issue in a lot of schools, so everything seems to be going smoothly, which is good.
Oh, that is good news.
What if we just made every week a 4-day work week?
Some schools are doing that.
Yeah, me as well.
We actually did that last year when we were remote. We had 4 days of synchronous classes where students would log in, but every Monday was, catch up, office hours. And I think the students missed that just as much as the teachers, maybe.
Mm-hmm. I remember when I was a counselor, we did it in the summers. It was just sort of a nice pace.
Mm-hmm.
So changing, because a lot of times the work days are fairly long anyway. So you're kind of already working 40 hours in 4 days. A lot of times when you work in schools. Hi, Beth, good to see you. Olivia, have you already taught this morning?
Yes, I have someone sitting with my students right now for like a weird gap of time, and then we have our remediation period for 30 minutes of this, and then someone will be with them for like the last 15 minutes of the conference, so or session.
And you teach AP Spanish language. Do you also do AP Spanish lit at Jefferson High School?
No, we haven't really had we're pretty small, and the AP program is for languages is even smaller, just because of the availability of language teachers, honestly. So we haven't had the demand for the in-person lit course. There is sometimes a demand for like a 6th year of Spanish, but it's for people who go through the AP level, or 5th year for some of them who go through the AP level and want something else before graduation. They don't want that gap year, but it becomes usually a communicative course rather than like a literary canon course. I think that's actually like something that AP could maybe capitalize on. Like, I don't know if there's some there's been talk among AP Spanish language teachers before of like, is there something besides diving straight into like the grad school literary canon that we could do for students who are so passionate about communication in the language and using their skills in some authentic ways, but don't really feel that literary criticism is the way to go with that?
Right. Right. I remember my students were really excited about AP Spanish language and super intimidated by AP Spanish literature.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I tried to sell them on it like the first few years of the program even more. We can offer it virtually, but we don't have classroom space scheduled right now for it, or the demand. I think we would make the space and availability if there were students breaking down the doors to read that poetry, but for some reason they're not. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, it's the same with English. I think anything that's written centuries and centuries before your time becomes less and less relevant unless you have someone to really make it come alive for you. I think it would be fun to be that person, but that's not been the appeal so far.
Sure.
Hi, Rich.
Hello, good morning.
Good
How's
morning.
everybody doing?
Good to see you.
Do you guys see it says you, or does it say my name there, David?
It says your name.
It says what? I'm sorry.
It says your name.
Okay, great. All right. I just wanted to make sure.
I think it just says you for you because that's
Okay,
what mine says
perfect.
as well.
Perfect.
Rich, are you in your classroom, or do you have a classroom and you just, or like you bounce around?
I'm at one of my schools, and I share the room with another teacher, so it's kind of a shared classroom. But one of my schools, I have an actual trailer that is mine for a couple days, and in my third school, I have a shared classroom as well.
Okay.
Very busy shared classroom. So
You're used to traveling, I'm sure.
yeah.
All right. Well, we could go ahead and get started because it's a little bit past time. It's 10:22. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see you here. Just a couple of points as we get started before I introduce everybody, our esteemed panel for this session. I've put a few resources in the chat. There's a couple of reports that we're going to be referencing throughout our presentation today. One is a MERC report on promoting equity in gifted and talented programs. And we'll talk through some of the data in that report and some of the strategies. Amy's going to go into that for how we can actually promote equity in gifted programs, and Rich is going to give us some examples. And then we have another report on promoting equity in advanced placement or AP classes. So we'll talk about some of the data in that report, some of the strategies, some of the sources of inequities in AP. And then we have two real live AP teachers on this call with Chris and Olivia. So we're so excited to have them here. We're going to get some student perspective as well during the call. But wanted to give you access to those reports in case you wanted to take a look. For both of those reports, we also have corresponding podcast episodes if you'd like to take a look and don't have time to read a full report. But there's a lot of really good information in there. Also, in the Q&A section, I posted two questions I would love to get people's feedback on and ideas during our presentation. One question is, how can you tell that a student is gifted? So like, what's your sort of, in your work, what's your definition for a gifted student? How do you actually know if a student is gifted or not? And the second question is, what is the purpose of AP classes? So what do you see? There's a lot of reasons why a student might take an AP class. What do you see as sort of the essential purposes of taking an AP class? So both of those are available for you to share your thoughts kind of throughout our presentation today. We'll have our two presentations going on. There'll be about 20 minutes each. And then we'll have Q&A at the end that will sort of focus on the full conversation that we're having. Feel free to post questions in the chat as we go along, but we'll also be sure to address any questions at the end. At the end, you could either post questions in the chat or you can request to share your audio and video, and then we can pull you up on stage here with us and you can join our conversation. That's another really great way to ask questions during that section of our session today. But I'd like to go ahead and introduce the people who are going to be speaking with you. So first we have Rich Ashburn, who is a gifted resource teacher at Adams Elementary, Harvey Elementary, and Laburnum Elementary in Henrico County Public Schools. We have Amy Jefferson, who is a PhD student in Curriculum, Culture, and Change in the VCU School of Education. She's also a co-author on the Gifted and Talented report that I mentioned. We have Chris Gannon, who's a social studies and AP teacher at Herndon High School in Fairfax County Public Schools. We have Olivia Exum, who is an AP Spanish teacher at Goochland High School in Goochland County Public Schools. And my name is David Naff. I'm the Associate Director of MERC, and help to lead a really dynamic team looking at advanced coursework throughout K-12 and how we can better support students having equitable access to advanced courses, because we know that they're so important. I'm going to share my screen here. Can everybody see the presentation right now? All right. I'll take silence as a yes. Okay, so we're going to start off with this discussion about developing equitable gifted programs in Title I settings using evidence-based practice. So first of all, when we're talking about equitable, the research that we're going to share today is coming from the MERC Equitable Access and Support for Advanced Coursework study. This is a study that was commissioned in December of 2019 by our Policy and Planning Council. We've been working hard at it ever since. We have a couple of literature reviews that I shared in the chat, but we also have a big secondary data analysis, a student survey, a policy analysis, and a multiple case study component of this. So this is a topic that you're interested in. I definitely encourage you to follow our updates, because we're going to have a lot to share related to this, this topic over the next few years. So really with this study, we're asking who takes advanced courses. And so far we have 2 reports that are unpacking this in different ways that we're going to talk about today. First on giftedness and the second on AP classes. And in this giftedness report, we ask a series of questions. First, what does it mean to be gifted? And we get into the history of gifted programs here. We ask who receives gifted services to take a look at the disparities. We'll talk about that today. We'll talk about why disparities in gifted programs matter. Talk about what factors contribute to disparities in gifted services according to the literature, and then what strategies help to address disparities in gifted education. But what we're going to mainly focus on today is this question about who receives gifted services and what does the data show. So taking a look at this, first of all, looking at the national percentage of gifted enrollment by race, this is looking at data from the Office of Civil Rights, the most recent data from 2015, 2016. So what we could see here is students' race, ethnicity. We're primarily looking at Asian, white, Latinx, and Black, because that's where we really see the disparities. And we're looking at overall enrollment compared to gifted enrollment. So looking at the overall enrollment in the student population this year in 2016 compared to the gifted enrollment that year. In the right column, you can see this ratio of gifted to overall. So a perfect ratio would be 1.0 in this case. So we could see that in overall gifted enrollment compared to the overall enrollment, that Asian and white students are overrepresented, particularly Asian students who nearly double their representation, while Latinx and Black students are underrepresented, and Black students are around half of their expected representation in gifted programs. Here's what this looks like in Virginia. So we can see that there's the same kind of comparisons here. Asian and white students tend to be overrepresented over not quite as much compared to national averages, but Latinx and Black students are particularly underrepresented in these programs in Virginia. So over here, we can see what the gifted numbers are, those ratios. So we're underperforming the national averages in terms of gifted representation for these underrepresented groups. In Virginia, the proportion of the gifted representation to total student population in Virginia, the way that students are actually included in the gifted program is they're either referred, they get referred for potential giftedness, and then they actually get identified to participate in the program. So this is looking at what our K-5 population was in 2016-17, the percentage of students that were identified for gifted and talented, and the students who were referred for gifted and talented. You can see that there's the same kind of disparities here. So Black and Latinx students were under-identified and under-referred compared to their overall representation, and Asian students were over-identified in both of those categories. Gifted programs in Virginia by school poverty level. We see here that there's a very clear connection between socioeconomic status and gifted participation. So looking at this, first of all, in terms of low poverty, middle poverty, and high poverty. Low poverty represents 25% or fewer students receiving free and reduced lunch. Middle poverty is somewhere in between, and then high poverty is more than 75% of the students receiving free and reduced lunch. So we look at what these comparisons are here. Virginia nationally, compared to national numbers, are more likely to have gifted programs across all poverty levels for schools, which is encouraging. But as we can see in the bottom part here, the number of students or the percentage of students who are actually participating in gifted programs drops precipitously across different levels of school poverty. So the higher the school poverty, the less likely it is that students are participating in gifted programming. And we could see this in a more kind of student level as well. So this is data based off of a really dynamic study by Grissom and colleagues in 2019. This is a nationally representative sample of over 30,000 students. So we can see here the socioeconomic quintiles going up from the first through the fifth quintile. And this is gifted participation by socioeconomic status. So as we can see, being low SES is a strong predictor of you not being identified for gifted participation. Students in the fifth SES quintile are 6 times as likely as students in the first SES quintile to participate in gifted programs. What's also really interesting is they're twice as likely as students that are in the fourth socioeconomic quintile. So even making that jump from the fourth to the fifth socioeconomic quintile, there's a really precipitous jump that doubles even at this level. So there's a clear connection between family wealth and participation in gifted programs. Let's look at this with socioeconomic status, but also bringing in the racial factor here. Okay, so we can see that the blue bars represent white students, orange bars are Black students, Latinx students are the gray bars, and then Asian students are the yellow bars, right? So these arrows are pointing specifically at the Black student representation. So we can see across all socioeconomic levels, Black students tend to be the least represented in gifted programs at all levels of socioeconomic status. And then when we look at the comparison from the first to the fifth socioeconomic quintile, here's what the differences are. Asian students are 4 times their representation in the first quintile, Latinx students are 4 times their representation, Black students are 8 times their representation, and white students are 13 times their representation in the first quintile. So in other words, white students benefit the most in terms of gifted representation by increasing their socioeconomic status. And then finally, let's take a look at this in terms of comparisons with test scores, because one of the prominent ways that you identify a student is gifted or not is based off of standardized tests typically. So we're looking at this across the socioeconomic quintiles. This is comparing students who already scored the 95th percentile or 99th percentile in math and reading. And you can see that even for students who score the same on standardized tests, there's a pretty clear connection, especially at the 95th percentile. The higher your socioeconomic status is, the more likely you are to be identified and actually participate in gifted programs. And when Amy talks today, she'll talk a little bit about opportunity gaps, and this is a good illustration of that. And what contributes to disparities in gifted services? Amy's going to talk us through some of the highlights in the literature.
Thank you. Myriad factors contribute to racial and socioeconomic disparities in gifted services, such as differences in family resources, school resources, and bias identification practices. For example, Peters and Engeran in 2016 found students from low-income families with inequitable enrichment opportunities, suggesting that performance on achievement tests might be influenced by disparities in preschool attendance and participation in activities prior to gifted identification. Kendi 2019 also points out that such opportunity gaps for preparatory experiences often impact students of color as well. Advocacy for gifted identification may be a challenge for the parents of underrepresented students, resulting in those students who hold potential to remain overlooked. In addition, marginalized families whose children qualify for gifted services may feel hesitant about participation in advanced programs due to a lack of diversity representation and the demands of additional homework and the possible need for tutoring. Okay, next slide. There you go. Just as the opportunity to learn varies by family resources, student access to quality gifted education programs varies by school resources. Resource differences are impacted by the location of the school or district, which in turn may influence the teaching expertise of the staff, the program funding, the availability of services for students identified as gifted, and overall student access to accelerated learning. As Purrier and Kettler found in 2017, wealthier schools and districts were likely to employ more experienced teachers and have more enrichment opportunities for those students receiving gifted services. Inequities in school resources again link back to family resources. For example, in a school with limited resources, higher SES families might pay for supplemental learning and enrichment opportunities for their children outside of school. They may also be more likely to move to a school or district with more support for gifted programs, to advocate for their child's participation in advanced coursework, and to request additional gifted testing if their child is not identified during the initial gifted qualification process. Okay, next slide. Thank you. School desegregation led to bias testing and identification practices that supported racist and classist beliefs about children, resulting in disparities in gifted program representation. Educators holding low expectations for racial minority and low SES students decrease student opportunity to learn. For example, Peters and Engeran in 2016 found that students from higher income families are more often perceived as gifted. It is important to consider that the lack of diversity in the teacher workforce may also contribute to inequities in student referrals for gifted testing and services. For example, Black teachers are more likely to refer Black students, while white teachers are less likely to refer Black students. Similarly, bias in the selection of resources and testing materials for gifted identification may result in inequitable access to understanding. For example, when questions are created without consideration of diverse experiences and perspectives, details explaining the context of the questions may be left out, resulting in bias shown towards groups that are not from middle-class culture, thus hindering comprehension and leading to inequitable testing results. Next slide, thank you. As Burris 2019 explains, being identified as gifted in elementary school increases the likelihood of continuing advanced coursework throughout high school. Recommendations and strategies to overcome disparities in gifted services support the use of universal screening, so all students are considered for gifted programs. Additionally, it's suggested that local norms be created to compare students to same age peers within their own school instead of same age peers nationally. Using multiple types of assessment, such as performance and project-based data, may help create a more holistic picture of student ability. Alternative forms of assessment may also reduce barriers created by the possible cultural bias I previously mentioned found in standardized tests. For example, nonverbal assessments may be helpful to multi-language speakers since the test focuses more on reasoning skills and less on understanding language. Exposing all students to enrichment and adopting a talent development approach to giftedness increases the opportunities for fostering and identifying gifted potential beyond a traditional pull-out program. The use of a committee to observe all students throughout the year for signs of potential giftedness aligns with the mindset of expanding gifted services school-wide. Additionally, the literature suggests diversifying the teacher workforce, using multicultural instructional practices, and providing professional development for educators related to understanding and nurturing giftedness in underrepresented student groups. In summation, for gifted programs to reflect the diversity in today's schools, there needs to be a shift in identification practices and more equitable access to student opportunities for advanced coursework. Now we will hear from Rich.
Thank you. Last year, I was hired in January to come on as the gifted resource teacher for 4 schools. I'd previously worked from Denver, Colorado, and my family had moved to Richmond. And I kind of sit back in the virtual meetings that our department had and kind of just wanted to listen to what the hot topics were. And it became very clear when our gift and talent administrator would talk to us and have team meetings that the issue of equality within gifted services was at the top of the list. And so I asked myself, as a new hire, as somebody new to the district, what could I do? A lot of the discussion was about policies, procedures, different community meetings that were taking place. And I didn't know where my voice would fit into that. But I thought, but I do have a voice within my schools, and I can make a difference in my community. And that idea of community is really important to me, because prior to becoming a teacher, I was in public health, specifically in community health promotion. And that really is the lens in which I see a lot of different things, because one of the things we do in community health promotion is we try to reduce injuries and diseases and improve health, but we try to enhance the quality of life. And they do that through legislation, engineering, and educational programming. And that's where I really felt the connection of something that I could do. So I started looking for research and ideas about what was going on. And that's when I found this report. And I was really fascinated by some of the information in there, specifically the factors that contribute and the strategies that were suggested. That's where I could really go into that and say, what can I do, and how can I take these initiatives, suggestions, and make a difference? Are there 1 or 2, 3, 4 things that I could do? And the things that I looked at that I thought I could do in my community were to assist in professional development, really collaborate with the teachers in their understanding and getting to know how I can support them. The second was to develop parent relationships. Really wanted to connect in my community and let them know about the opportunities that gifted education provides and the steps. And do you need assistance? And the other one is to increase the enrichment opportunities that my students would get. And at the end of the first year, my 6 months, I wrote a little proposal based off of this to my administrator, Jenna Conley. And I said, Jenna, I would like to do these things next year. What do you think? Is it okay with you? And she said, this looks terrific. And I'd like to have a conversation a little bit later with you. And what I didn't know is the district was already had an initiative going that would work with gifted and talented students in lower income. And they had identified a school. And they said, would you be willing to come on and join us in developing this program? And I said, I would love to. And using the MERC report, I specifically the part that about increasing the enrichment opportunities, because what we did is we just started this week was our first week in which we have an after school in which I went to teachers and asked them to identify students that were not yet identified, but if they had the opportunity to engage in enrichment opportunities, might we see a bump that would help us get them identified? And so I got to collaborate with teachers to identify students. We are now teaching those students after school, and everything that we selected are enrichment opportunities that do not just take place in the 1 hour that we're with them after school, but have a component in which they can participate year round. For instance, we collaborated with a chess program, Chess for Life, based out of Seattle, Washington, that has an online program in which the kids can watch videos of lessons and then participate in worksheets and actually play other students that are participating throughout the United States in a closed system. So there's no chatting, there's no names, very safe and secure. But that's something that they can do in the summer, on the weekends, in the evenings when they're not in the classroom with me. In addition to that, we worked with Code VA, who allows free access to all their after-school programming or virtual programming to any student that's in a Title I. So through this initiative and through using this research, it really helped define what we were going to do, how we might be able to move the needle within our community. David, I think I've taken my time. I could talk about that for a lot longer, but I want to be mindful of my time.
Thanks, Rich. Yeah, I mean, it's helpful to hear how you're applying research in your work, and we'll have some more time for discussion about this at the end for sure. And keep in mind all this discussion we just had about gifted programs and some of the potential kind of pipeline issues from elementary through high school as we shift focus here and start talking about AP programs. But this is our contact information for me, for Amy, and for Rich, in case you want to get in touch with us for just sort of asking follow-up questions related to this. So let's shift gears here and talk about advanced placement. So we were just talking about what this looks like in elementary school. We're going to jump ahead to high school. AP classes are the most prominent college preparatory program that's available in high schools across the country. They're actually available internationally. And so it makes sense to take a really careful look at how they are offered to students and how students are supported in these classes. So we're asking here, who takes AP courses, essentially? And like I mentioned before, this is the report that's corresponding with this. You have a link in the chat if you want to take a look at it. In this report, we ask, what are AP courses? Who enrolls and succeeds in these courses? Why do disparities in AP matter? What factors contribute to disparities in AP participation and performance? And what policies and practice help to address disparities in AP enrollment, access enrollment, and performance? And I'm really excited to have Chris and Olivia on today because they're doing some dynamic work in their high schools to help address this. So let's start with this question. What are AP courses? I'm sure folks that are on this call are pretty familiar. There's 38 total AP courses available from the College Board. 34 of them are available in some way in the MERC region. On average, our school divisions offer 21 AP courses. When we look at the growth of the AP programs in schools and colleges, from when it was created in the early 1950s till now, I think that this is fascinating. The program has exploded in popularity over time. So 1955 this is representing the 2018-19 school year at the end of this graph. So the blue line is schools that are participating, and the red line is colleges that are participating. So schools had a nearly 200-fold increase over time, from 104 initially, or in 1955 to over 22,000 in 2019. Colleges had around a 30-fold increase from 130 early on to over 4,000 colleges. Nearly all colleges accept AP scores in some way at this point. Let's take a look at the average annual growth of AP in schools and colleges by decade. So looking at this by decade will help us to see in a more kind of granular way, or sort of more of like a macro view of when we actually saw some of these increases in AP. So as you can see here, there's been steady growth over time. But this has been particularly true for the last 40 or so years. So starting in the 1980s, we saw a big bump. Some attribute this to things like the Nation at Risk report that was really trying to promote greater enrollment in advanced classes. Especially in the 2000s and 2010s, we saw a really big increase in participation where on average around 500 new schools came on board every year, and around 60 to 70 new colleges came on board every year. So especially recently, we've seen a ton of growth with the AP program. Let's look at who's actually participating. So growth in students and exams taken in AP from that same time. So it started off early, around 1,200 students that were participating in AP, around 2,000 exams that they took onto the program. These numbers are each around a 2,300-fold increase over time. So in the 2018-19 school year, around 3 million students participated in AP, and they took around 5 million AP exams with corresponding fees that are part of the revenue structure for the College Board. Looking at this from a decade standpoint, we could see that participation in AP for students and their exams were particularly pronounced from 2000 and 2010 in the last 2 decades. So especially recently, we've seen this really big growth in students participating in the AP program. But what's fascinating is let's dig into these last 2 decades. So seeing what the participation has been like over time. So we can see that the peak in student growth occurred in the 2009-10 year with around 153,000 more students participating. Peaks in exams occurred in the 2014-15 school year, over 300,000 new exams taken that year. And then we started to see this kind of steady decline into the 2018-19 school year, where we saw only 16,000 more students and 8,000 more exams compared to the previous year. And then perhaps unsurprisingly, during the first year of COVID, we saw a decrease. So 183,000 fewer students participated. They took around 350,000 fewer exams. This is only the second time in the 60 or 70-year history of the AP program that there's been a decline in participation. So who enrolls and succeeds in AP classes? So drawing some parallels with our gifted research, white, Asian, and high-income students tend to be more represented in AP than Black, Latinx, and low-income students. So what does this look like? Let's look at some comparisons here. So looking over time from 1994 to 2013, we can see some encouraging signs that across all racial groups, there has been an increase in participation in AP classes. So for each of these, there's been over at least a 200% increase across time. What's important here is to recognize that there's still some pretty stark disparities that have been really enduring over that time. So compared to Asian students, compared to white students, Black students have been at least 1.5 times less likely to participate in AP. And they've been at least 2.5 times less likely to participate in AP. So this suggests that while we want increased AP expansion, we also might need to make it a little bit more targeted to start diminishing some of these gaps that we're seeing between racial groups. So what does this look like in terms of the number of high school graduates scoring a 3 or higher in an AP exam? This is according to College Board data. So we've seen an increase over a 10-year span of who's actually scoring a 3 or higher and actually passing the exam to potentially get college credit. But again, if we take a look at this and actually compare it to the number of graduates or the percentage of the graduating class in 2019, according to data from the National Center for Education Statistics, we can see that white students are roughly what we would expect in terms of the number of student or percentage of students scoring 3 or above. Asian students are more than twice as likely that we would expect for them to participate. Latinx students are roughly equivalent. They're slightly underrepresented. Black students are about a third of their expected representation in students scoring a 3 or higher on an AP exam. Let's take a look at what this looks like in Virginia. So this is looking at overall enrollment in AP compared to AP Math and AP Science. So percentage of Virginia student enrollment and then the percentage of enrollment in each of these levels. Let's start with this comparison again. Again, Black and Latinx students are underrepresented while Asian students are particularly overly represented. The main takeaway here is that the underrepresentation or the disparities are particularly pronounced in AP Math and Science classes. One potential explanation for this could be a function of access, where AP Math and Science classes are less likely to be available in high poverty urban areas and higher poverty rural areas as well. And then let's take a look at AP testing by race and ethnicity in Virginia in 2019. So just looking at the percentage of students who took the AP tests and the percentage that scored 3 or higher. Again, we see the same kinds of disparities here. White and Asian students tend to be overrepresented. White students only slightly. Black students especially tend to be underrepresented in both of these categories. All right. So why do these disparities in AP matter? AP classes are highly valuable to students, and there's a couple of ways for us to think about why this matters. One is from a function of college readiness, enrollment, and persistence, because this is a post-secondary access issue, but also this idea of potential social reproduction and economic opportunity. Let's start here. AP classes are intended to get students ready for college, right? So in terms of readiness, it offers exposure to college-level curriculum. I know I had a lot of students when I was a high school counselor who would say that their first year of college was way easier than it was for their junior and senior year of high school because AP classes were so rigorous. So it's intended to get you prepared for the rigor of college. It's also helpful from an admissions or enrollment standpoint, right? So if you pass an AP exam, you could go ahead and get college credit, but it's also, it looks good to have APs on your transcript. A lot of colleges will look for that, obviously. And it also tends to be beneficial potentially for first-generation college students, right? Where they could get a preview of what college is like when their parents didn't go to four-year college or graduate from four-year college. It also might get them a chance to get ahead a little bit in the college admissions race. In terms of persistence, there's evidence suggesting that students who take AP classes in high school have a stronger college GPA and completion rate. And it also ends up helping with the overall cost of college, because if you get college credit, that's fewer credits that you actually have to pay for when you go to college. So this is a socioeconomic issue as well. And this idea of cost is really connected with this idea of AP classes either being connected with economic opportunity or potentially being this sort of continuation or social reproduction where students who come into school as low income are going to continue to be low income by the time they get out of school. So in terms of social reproduction, There's some tracking implications here. So students who are racial and ethnic minority and lower income tend to be in lower academic tracks all throughout K-12. So that's potentially reproducing social and socioeconomic classes. There's also some issues here around availability and affluence. So in lower income areas, AP classes tend to be less available. Whereas in more affluent areas, there's more likely to be this kind of concept of opportunity hoarding, where higher income folks or higher income families are more likely to attend schools that have access to AP classes. In terms of economic opportunity, there's a very clear connection between higher education and career earnings. So we want students to have access to higher education if possible, but also college is getting more and more expensive. So the rising cost of college, taking AP classes is a really potential key way of ameliorating that. So AP classes, if we continue to see disparities, find themselves at this kind of tension point between social reproduction and economic opportunity, where they could be providing greater economic opportunity to students who need it the most, but oftentimes they're contributing to this kind of tracking social reproduction sort of cycle that we see happening in schools. And then finally, what factors contribute to disparities in AP participation and performance? I'll go through these pretty quickly. We know that parental influence, advocacy, and perceived involvement are big key issues. It's more likely for schools to perceive low-income families and racial and ethnic minority families to be less involved in the education of their children, although research suggests that it might be that they're just involved in different ways. And then parental influence, advocacy, this idea of opportunity hoarding comes up here too. Student belonging in AP classes matters. So if I am one of the only racial or ethnic minority students in an AP class, it might disincentivize me from actually wanting to participate in those classes in the future. Students tend to select classes based off of their social goals as well. There's evidence suggesting that in higher poverty environments, teaching in AP classes tends to be lower quality. There's implications for the performance of students. And then sort of similar to what Amy was talking about earlier in terms of bias in curricula, there's some evidence suggesting that there's bias in AP exams in the ways that they're created and scored. There's also this idea of racial and socioeconomic segregation due to academic tracking. It's very critical that students receive academic preparation to be successful in AP classes by the time they get to high school. In particular, they need to take Algebra 1 in middle school, so that's a real clear gateway point that could be addressed. Educator expectations and bias is pretty clearly connected to this. And there's research suggesting the Sorhagen article is really fantastic that digs into low-income students are more likely to be susceptible to low expectations from educators. There's evidence of under-identification happening for AP classes, gatekeeping practices, particularly requiring teacher recommendations for students to participate in AP, and special education students and English language learner students are particularly unlikely to participate in AP. So when the student gets a label as a student with disability or English learner, it very much diminishes their chances of participating in AP. And then what policies and practice help to address the disparities? Part of this is around evaluating and modifying prominent policies. So some of the prominent ones we see, inducement or incentive programs, so paying students and teachers for getting a 3 or above on an AP exam, for example, accountability or AP expansion, having a minimum number of AP classes that are required for schools to offer or for divisions to offer, but also offering virtual AP, which we've been seeing more and more during the pandemic. Each of these, with potentially the exception of the inducement program, has some evidence of being potentially beneficial for students and narrowing some of these disparities. But oftentimes when these are offered, they end up further benefiting students who are already participating in AP. So the idea is that you need really more targeted expansion. And that includes detracking policies and practices to detrack earlier classes and to move students into more kind of heterogeneous groupings. It requires stable leadership, earlier higher detracking and classing, and making sure that you share and discuss achievement data routinely with faculty. It tends to be easier to detrack 9th and 10th grade English and history classes. It's a little bit more difficult to do this in math, but we have some pretty compelling evidence in even our region of early detracking in especially world history and classes like that in 9th grade can be beneficial for students, more students taking AP classes by sophomore, junior, and senior year. And then, like we mentioned before, removing teacher recommendations and strict prerequisites that don't really predict success in AP classes. And one of the big takeaways is active recruitment and targeted recruitment of underrepresented students. And to that end, I want to transition to hearing from our AP teachers who are going to talk about what this looks like kind of in their world. So Chris, we'll start with you.
All right, thank you. So my name is Chris Gannon. I'm a social studies AP teacher in Fairfax County. I specifically teach at Herndon High School. If you're unfamiliar with Fairfax or Herndon, I say it's one of the most diverse schools and one of the most diverse districts in Virginia. I've got the data up here from our most recent AP exam year. To give you a little bit of sort of tie-in with our school demographics, we're a majority minority school. About 50% of our students are Hispanic, Latinx. We also have a higher percentage of free and reduced lunch students in our school compared to the district. About 42% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. And about 30% or so, based on this year's numbers, are receiving English language services or classified as English language learners. And so the data that we see from our AP test scores really reflects a lot of what David was sharing that's taking place on sort of a national level and in Virginia as well, where, right, we specifically see that our Latinx and Black students are drastically sort of underrepresented from where we would expect based on our school demographic numbers. So we track our AP participation in the 11th and 12th grade, where the numbers that are available, right? And only about a third of those students, right, are participating or less in taking an AP class. David, if you could go to the next, one more slide, sorry. So as a school, we've looked at some ways in which we can address these disparities, not only for the number of students who are enrolled in an AP class, but are also successful, meaning earning a 3 or above. One thing is the reduction in test fees to sort of remove that burden of paying for the AP exam. We're lucky in Fairfax County that the first 6 exams that students take are paid for by the division. And that includes classes where there might be 2 exams associated with the class. I've taught the AP microeconomics, macroeconomics class, for example. There's 2 separate exams. They treat that as one. So that removes sort of the financial burden for a lot of students, which has helped. That policy has been in place here for the last few years. At our school level, we've implemented what we call our Hornet Challenge program. This is what we sort of look at as a chance to reach out to first-time AP students, particularly those coming up maybe who haven't had prior exposure to a gifted or an honors class in the middle school or at the freshman level, to really work with them on sort of the AP style skills. So working on reading skills, writing skills, academic development, right? That really might be a burden or a barrier to those students' success in a first-time AP class. So those students are partnered with teacher mentors that they meet with as their homeroom teacher throughout the year. We took a little bit of a hit with this when we went virtual last year. So this year is sort of an adjusted version of this as we're coming back in person with this sort of academic re-entry, gauging where our students are. But as David mentioned, we also wanted to partner with parents to engage parents here, because we know that that's sometimes a barrier to students enrolling in AP classes. So we've worked pretty diligently with our PTSA and our Hispanic PTSA to really make sure that they have all the information about honors, AP classes, what that means, what that looks like on a high school transcript, the benefits of taking those classes. And we've also really worked on our vertical alignment of AP instruction at our high school, really even actually reaching down to the middle school, to the 8th grade, 9th grade teachers as well, trying to prep them. So in our social studies department, for example, we really focused on the writing instruction, how we can build that to help those students succeed first time into an AP class. So we've looked at lots of different ways that we're trying to increase equity sort of in our department and in our school. Trying to really engage students and bring them into the AP classes, right? Because when we look at our data, we really notice that there's an underrepresentation based on our student population.
Thanks, Chris.
I'm going to kind of be mindful of my time here. Yep.
Olivia.
Great, thank you. Hi. Could you, oh, perfect. So I just wanted to quickly mention, so I'm a Spanish teacher at Goochland High School. I represent the regular level programs, Spanish 1 through 3, as well as our Advanced College Academy program and our AP program for Spanish language. And so, I'm not the most qualified person to talk globally about some of the impacting factors in our demographics, but being in the language program has given me sort of a unique perspective on some populations that are less represented on a whole scale, especially in these advanced programs. And so I think that the biggest thing about, especially following a much larger high school from a much larger district, is there's a perception, I think, across Virginia in some areas that smaller schools, and particularly rural labeled schools, are this is why we can't have nice things. We're not able to curate the programs and curate the opportunities because of just a lack of manpower, a lack of time, a lack of resources and things like that. And I think what I hope what you'll see as we get into it today is that through our human element, through our relationship building and our connections at all levels, so from central office to the smallest classroom, is that's sort of the thing that's worked the best as we try to address some of our issues and resolve them moving forward. So anyway, the way that Goochland High School gives access to its advanced programs begins early on in middle school, consistent with what some of the other presenters have said. And I think you'll see when we get to it, I have some quotes from students who gave me permission to share what they said. That this is represented there in their feelings as well. So their impressions reflect what's actually being done, which is great because sometimes those things are opposite. So we begin with the process of issuing individual invitations to middle schoolers. For that are identified through counseling, conversations with counselors, individual teachers, conversations with individual students. So it's very person oriented. It's very face-to-face, very conversational in that way. A list is issued to counselors afterward, and they organize individual student meetings. And I was able to ask about 50 specific students. Each of them was able to report that they had an individual student meeting. So beyond what their impressions may have been for their reasons for taking certain courses and how they found out about them, they did all confirm that they were able to have an individual student meeting, which is super cool. I know not something that everywhere is able to do. We also have student panels several times a year. Some of these are done in concurrence with something like curriculum night in the evening so that parents have access to it outside of work hours and things like that. But some are done during class time to make sure that all students are able to access. So we do have, as you might imagine in most schools, the issue of if we do something after school, there's a whole huge portion of the demographic that does not get to participate because of transportation and availability of that. So, sorry, in short of a shared space right now. During the school day is really important. It's a chance for them to hear from their peers as well as from teachers. And so some of these are arranged by school counseling during class time and done during major classes such as English class where everyone is participating. And we're not going to miss out on someone. Others are done teacher to teacher. So within the World Languages department, we've been able to swap teachers and students during portions of our classes to make sure, Chris was mentioning the vertical alignment. It's something that's really important to us as well, to make sure that students can ask questions to students and get their perspectives, and also have a chance to ask the teacher of the course that they may be taking next year, et cetera. Let's see. Something that's really important in that is to make sure that within the faculty as much as possible, which in our department, which is small, it's not a super diverse department. We are of 4 language teachers. We have 1 who is not white this year. And beyond that, sorry, we've got bells ringing. But beyond that, so it's really important that students are able to see students that they feel represent them, be that abled and disabled student diversity, be that race student diversity, socioeconomic groups, students who participate in teams that they recognize, and things like that. So the panel is intended to be diversified so that everyone feels they can ask safely. Let's see. Trying to sort of rush through this. Sorry, I'm just looking at the time. We also offer the PSAT test for free to everyone. So this is every year, 9th through 11th graders. And after about 9th grade, they're kind of going, why do I have to take this again? And it's because each year different opportunities become available. This gives them access to the AP Potential program and opportunities for counselors to then come into classes once results have been released and discuss individual opportunities with each class of students, and then set up individual meetings again. So again, it's like time in the classroom. Our counselors don't stay like locked in an office somewhere. They're out with the students, and that's a huge piece of what we can do. And the teachers are given that flexibility. We have a lot of support from our administrators to do things like abandon 10 minutes of structured learning to switch classes and do things like that to make sure that students can talk with other students and teachers and students can talk together and connect. For the AP testing specifically, we have our coordinator of testing was talking with me yesterday about this, actually, because of one of my students' concerns. AP registration is happening like as we speak. The want to test should test policy. So we aren't able yet as the school to identify like a guaranteed funding source and say we will pay for this many tests for this many students always, but because we have this individual identification process, we're able to establish relationships with students on the teacher level, carry those relationships to the counseling level and to the testing coordination level. And so far, since the AP program has begun at Goochland, no student who couldn't afford the test didn't test. So the want to test should test policy enables us to, on an individual basis, request funding from different sources to make sure that every student can test. So beyond the free and reduced lunch discount, I should say. So I would be completely remiss in discussing AP without talking about our Advanced College Academy program, which is the ACA program. It's an associate degree program where students earn that diploma from Reynolds Community College at the time of their graduation from high school, and they are able to take AP and ACA courses. In many cases, these courses are dual transcribed. In some cases, the ACA course is a prereq for an AP course or vice versa. So they really run sort of hand in hand. It's a similar group of students, or in many cases, the exact same students that we're talking about in both. So you'll see some student quotes in just a moment that come from both of those groups, students who are taking both sets of courses for mostly the same reasons. Part of why the ACA program has helped with AP is that College Board sounds like a scary, inaccessible entity to some of the people in our community. And this has been particularly true of some of our lower income families, who have no generations in college, and are non-English speaking families. And I have some personal access with them, just as the Spanish teacher, getting pulled in on some different things. So Reynolds Community College is a place that they drive by. It's a place that holds events. It's a place that offers, like some of their buildings are designated disaster shelters in our community. It's just a community fixture. So it's much easier for us to access through that than to say, there's this expensive thing that you've never heard of before, even though it's fancy and you should be part of it. So it's been like a really great gateway for us to open access to AP by opening access to this college program. It's really just benefiting everyone all around. Let's see. We can offer some financial incentives, and I just want to make sure that I get this correct. And I wrote it somewhere right here. So we're able to offer here we go. So Reynolds Community College courses are usually $166.60 per credit hour. We're able to offer it to all of our students, no matter what, for $45 per credit hour, which is a significant reduction for them. For any textbooks, any materials that are needed for the courses that they would normally have to pay for themselves, it's all free. The school covers all of that. And then for any free and reduced lunch student, it's completely free, the tuition as well. So it offers a college degree to students who would otherwise not be able to get that. And that includes the AP classes. Any classes which are dual transcribed that they would like to take the AP exam for as well, we have that want to test, should test program that will allow them the access to those tests. So there's that. Let's see. Yeah, we can go ahead. So this is just a little, this is who we had, just so that you can see. This is 2018-19. This is the last data that I have access to because my students did not test in AP last year due to the communicative nature of the Spanish test and the inability to really facilitate that greatly throughout the years. We can move to the next one. You can look at that if you're interested. Okay, and maybe the next one. So here's who you might have wanted to hear from. It probably wasn't me. These are actual students. Had a sample of about 50 students. Anywhere that you see a demographic label, the student chose the demographic label that they wanted to be listed as. So that was not me putting that in there. That was at their request. These are some just confirmations of essentially what others were saying earlier about how we find and identify gifted students or advanced students. It's a really interesting mix of social impactors, family impactors, community impactors, external pressures. We have parents, coaches, and other people saying you should take this class. And then I'm trying to find, the whole program was advertised constantly at the middle school. There's no way you could miss it. So when this person said what she said, she was kind of rolling her eyes. She was like, why are you even asking us these questions? And everyone else in the room was like, yeah, oh my gosh, it was everywhere. So even though some of them were like, it was my teacher, it was my mom making me do it, my brother told me about it, he was in it last year, blah, blah, blah. They really felt like at the middle school level, they already knew what options were open to them. And it was really cool to hear them confirm that, because I have like this vague sense sometimes of my impressions of dealings with the middle school and then others that I know are true. And it was really nice to have this one particularly confirmed. You can see some evidence here of the teachers switching classes and things like that. Yeah, it's fine. We can go ahead. So the decision-making factors again reflect the research about gifted programs and identifying gifted students and sort of roadblocks, especially with some of them being social factors. My friends were doing the program. I knew that it becomes a cohort. So most of us in the AP classes take the rest of our classes together. All of us in the ACA classes take the rest of our classes together. And so that can be like a deterrent if you don't want to be with these people. And you'll see some of that in just a second on another slide. Or, you know, a total bonus benefit, exactly what they want. Oops. And yeah, okay, we'll go to this one then. So who is in the class? This was just an interesting, these are some students who wanted to be identified. I have a lot in common with some of the people in this class, but not much with the people in my core AP classes, is something that we are still, you know, I think in terms of our identification, wanting to address. This is a student who wants to be identified as Latinx, gender left out of it, and English is spoken at home. So the student is not currently in the ELL programs at Goochland, but interesting, just sort of social dynamic there. The only AP class I would take, because I might actually pass this one, this is a heritage speaker. Parents do not speak English. The student, since younger grades, has been responsible for, as you're probably familiar with these students in your schools too, for paying bills, for helping them navigate, you know, official documents from the government and things like that. Not feeling comfortable in the larger AP world. And you can sort of read these for yourself there. But the idea is, you know, because we get to know each other through these classes, we are forming our own social bonds. But in general, we might never have been part of the same groups as some of these other students who have, you know, since early elementary school flocked together because families know each other and they're part of this sort of strata of society. So let's see. What kind of time do we have? Okay, and that's it. So I'll be quiet.
Here's our contact. Thank you so much, Olivia. And here's our contact information in case anybody would like to get in touch to learn more about this work that's going on. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I know we've taken up our time, but in case anybody has any questions, maybe we can hang on for a few more minutes. Feel free to hop in and out if you need to. But does anybody have any questions about this information? Well, how about this? Our session's up, and I know that there's other sessions that people want to go to. So send us an email if you have any questions about any of this material or about the work that Chris, Rich, and Olivia are doing. But thank you for being with us today, and enjoy the rest of your time at the conference. And Catherine, I see you have a question. Connection between offering more access to PSAT and an increase in AP participation. Olivia, it sounds like that's in line with what you were saying.
Yeah, I was just trying to type something. Yeah, the AP Potential program really offers like the easiest way for people to identify and then target students who might be candidates for certain opportunities. And then that information can get passed to the teachers. So by being able to be in the classrooms, and we're the ones administering the PSAT, and there are all of these great questions as well, you know, before it, these survey type questions. And so by getting to do that year by year with the students, even before it gets to counseling with their results, we as the teachers are able to, you know, encourage those conversations and actually have some discussion. It's a little bit why sometimes our PSAT administration, sorry, Dr. Rainbolt, goes a little long, because we're actually having conversations around these questions that come up during the registration portion about their futures and things like that. So I would say absolutely yes to that question.
And I'd second that. Fairfax County offers the PSAT to all freshmen, sophomores, and juniors, and we rely on that identification. They used to call it the Young Scholar, but now I think it's switched over to AP Potential. Like there's like the official wording escapes me what it used to be called, but that actually shows up in our student information system. And so that way we can reach out to those students if they haven't, you know, thought about an AP class. The counselors and teachers can easily identify them.
And I see a question.
Yeah, thank you, Lorraine. I figured, yeah.
And from Tanya, are there guidance documents for identifying gifted students in elementary schools? I know that, at least from our research and from our policy analysis, it's such a division level decision for identifying students. Typically, there's some sort of committees involved with this process, some sort of testing that's typically involved. I know that there's guidance from the VDOE that they're updating right now about guidance for the education of gifted students, that they've made some proposed updates to make the program a little bit more equitable, especially the identification practices. But what I would say, Tanya, is we have some that detailed in our gifted report if you wanted to take a look at that. Or feel free to shoot me an email and we can discuss what we're finding in the policy analysis too. And Andy makes a good point about you have to have strong relationships to nurture. Absolutely. It's not just a function of access. We have to make sure students are successful and they're supported when they come to class. All right. Well, we are out of time. Thank you all so much for being a part of this, and I hope you have a great rest of the day at the conference. Read Andy's dissertation. It's really good on this topic.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much, Olivia. Thank you, Chris. Thanks, Rich, for your time. Have a great day.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.